In the last class, we saw how the carbon spectrum is decoupled by applying a weak RF radiation on the hydrogens, and that helps in simplifying the spectrum because now instead of seeing many multiplet structures, many peaks, they collapse into a single peak. But the cost of this, you lose the information of the multiplicity. So, let me show you an example of how the carbon spectrum looks cleaner or simpler when we do decoupling. So, this is shown in this picture. This is taken from the book Pavia, where this example is shown. So, you can see here that if I do a decoupling, so if I do not do a decoupling, when I record a normal spectrum of carbon, this is what the spectrum you will get for this molecule, which is shown here. So, you see different carbons are there. This is the aromatic region which is coming from this, and this is the carbonyl. But you can see there are many peaks now because of this J coupling. In some cases the peaks are overlapping. So, this triplet can start overlapping with this triplet and so on. So, that looks a little complicated, but now if I do a decoupling from hydrogen, that means I remove all the J coupling between carbon and hydrogen everywhere, then you will get something like this, which looks much cleaner. You can see here I am getting a single peak for every carbon. So, by simply counting the number of peaks, I can figure out how many carbons are there in the molecule. So, as far as interpretation is concerned, it is easier to interpret and I do not have to bother about the overlapping peak structure. So, you can see that is how the cleaner spectrum comes. So, most of the time when we look at analyzing the molecules, we will be looking at this type of a spectrum, which is decoupled spectrum, okay, not looking at the coupled. So, let us see what are the practical aspects when you record a carbon 13 NMR spectrum. So, similar to what we saw for the proton, it is important to understand what parameters will affect the carbon spectrum. So, first thing is, as we do in proton, we use TMS also in carbon as a reference. That we saw that in the last slide also, that if you have a peak corresponding to MS carbon, you set it to 0 and that with respect to that all other carbon peaks are monitored or calibrated. So, that is what is called calibration, and then usually, as I said, one proton decoupled spectra is acquired. Now, the one thing we saw that we lost the information of how many hydrogens are attached to the carbon. That is useful because remember, looking at a peak, I can directly say whether it is a methyl peak or it is coming from methylene or it is from methine and so on. That information is lost if I do decoupling, but there is a technique which called DEPT, DEPT. It is an acronym for a bigger name which we will see later, and that experiment helps you to get this information. So, this is a separate experiment, 1D experiment, which can be recorded to get the information for every carbon, that how many hydrogens are attached to that carbon. But normally if you directly you are not interested in multiplicity and only in the chemical shift and the number of carbons, you can do decoupling and get a cleaner spectrum. So, one thing one has to know practically is that the T1 and T2 relaxation of carbon is much longer than hydrogen. This is theoretically because of the low gamma of carbon. So, whenever the gamma is low, there is what is called dipole interactions. Dipolar interactions are weaker, and therefore, whenever dipolar interactions are weaker, the T1 and T2 are longer. So, T1 T2 relaxation for both the carbons, it is longer than hydrogens. In fact, if you go to carbons such as where there is no hydrogens attached, such as quaternary carbons in aromatics, or if you look at carbonyl, they have pretty long, very long T1 relaxation for this in absence of proton. So, basically what is the consequence of this is that in the same molecule I am going to have a range of T1 and T2 values. So, that is a big problem in a molecule, because typically we expect that if a molecule is for a given molecule, you expect all the atoms to have similar relaxation times, but it turns out for carbon it is not so. And what is the effect of this? The effect of this is that because of the long relaxation time, you have to use what is called a longer relaxation delay. Now, if you remember what is a relaxation delay? A relaxation delay is the delay that we use between two consecutive scans. So, if you record a 1D NMR spectrum, remember we apply a pulse and then we record a FID, then we have to wait for some time before the molecule is relaxes back to the full equilibrium situation, then you apply the next pulse. So, this cycle of applying a pulse, recording the data and a delay so that it comes back to equilibrium is repeated a number of times, that is called scans. So, in that picture the time delay between the FID is collected and before the next pulse we use the word relaxation delay, and that relaxation delay if you remember we said we told that it depends on the T1 value. So, typically the relaxation delay is about 4 to 5 times the T1 value of the sample. So, for protons it is typically a second. That means, if I want to have a long relaxation delay 1 to 2 seconds is a typical T1 of protons for small molecules. So, for hydrogen proton NMR we typically they use a relaxation delay of 5 to 10 seconds, typically it is not more than 5 practically. But in the case of carbon that is not, that is cannot be done, because in a carbon you have a much longer relaxation time, as written here it runs into several tens of seconds, it could be 10 seconds, 20 seconds. So, in that case if you want to use a relaxation delay you have to use about 100 seconds, let us say a minute of relaxation delay 60 seconds. So, that increases a time a lot, because if your one scan is going to take about a minute. So, if you want to do a 100 scan experiment it will be 100 minutes. So, you see the problem is because of a longer delay our time is also increasing a lot. So, practically what happens is we do not worry about this 5 times relaxation delay, because this long relaxation is only for the case of those carbons which do not have any attached proton, that is in absence of attached proton. For those protons we have a very long relaxation delay, but those carbons which have those carbons. So, those carbons which have protons attached they will have a short relaxation. So, that is the whole problem. The problem is there is a range of T1, T2 values, but for those carbons which are attached to a hydrogen it will have a short relaxation, relatively shorter, and therefore, all the NMR experiments typically when we do for carbon we worry about only those which are attached to hydrogens. So, that will be of the order of let us say few seconds T1 relaxation. So, your relaxation delay can be about 10 seconds. So, instead of using minutes. Now, what is the consequence of that? The consequence of that is that for those carbons where the T1 relaxation is very long, that time for those carbons we are not using the correct relaxation delay, and because of that the intensity of those peaks will now get distorted. Distorted means they will no longer be correct intensity. And why is it so? Remember, it depends on the relaxation delay on the recovery of the magnetization. If I do not recover the magnetization completely, my signal intensity is lost. So, let me again show you this with a picture which will work out this. So, if you look at this relaxation, so we are looking basically what we are talking about is a pulse and followed by an FID, okay, and this portion is called relaxation delay. And this is relaxation delay, and what happens is after the end of this cycle you go back to this position and this is repeated n times, and that is called n scans. So, now if this relaxation delay, this is basically a recovery of the signal, which is the signal starts when it is here, the signal is basically 0 and then it slowly recovers and goes to full at this position. This is almost 99% when it comes to this time after a long time, and this is the situation at this position here. So, that means after the FID is over it is 0, then when it comes back to this position and then when it during this portion it relaxes like this. So, therefore, this time is typically 5 times T1, okay. But suppose I do not give 5 times T1, I give only 3 times T1 or 2 times T1. So, this will be probably around 2 times T1. So, when I do this 2 times T1, my signal is only this much, this could be probably around 70%. So, you see from here to here I have lost 30% of my signal. So, therefore, if I do not use a correct relaxation delay, my intensity is no longer now correct value, because intensity has decreased by some 30% or depending on how much is the T1, and that is a big problem. Therefore, the intensity is not fully come back to the equilibrium, and when the intensities are not the correct value, you cannot use it for quantifying. What does it mean? That means you cannot use, they are no longer proportional to the number of carbons. So, remember this is a big difference from proton NMR. In proton NMR we saw that the number of protons is related to the area of the peak. So, from the area of the peak we were able to recover the number of protons, but you cannot do that in the case of carbon NMR. In the case of carbon 13 NMR, you will have to now depend, you cannot use the intensities anymore because of this incomplete relaxation. The carbons are no longer, the area of the carbon peak is no longer proportional to the number of hydrogen, because we are not correctly captured the intensity has got somewhere abruptly cut because of this incomplete relaxation. So, this is a practical problem, and that is what another reason why intensity goes down is because of an effect called nuclear Overhauser effect. We will see that later in 2D NMR. So, there because of this nuclear Overhauser effect, which comes because of the decoupling of protons. So, when you do a proton decoupling, that means when you apply a weak RF irradiation on protons, it affects the carbon intensities. So, these factors of decoupling, incomplete relaxation etc. results in the problem that the carbon intensity you can never be, it never be considered as a quantitative, and normally we do not use carbon NMR for quantifying the number of protons. We use always hydrogen proton 1D NMR for quantification. So, this is what you can see in the previous slide. If you see here, here we saw that here also you can see that this is a CH2, this is carbon, this is also one carbon, but look at this intensity, they are no longer same. If they both are single carbon, you would have expected both of them to have the same intensity. Similarly, look at methyl, it is having a smaller. So, the intensities are no longer related to the number of carbons, and all this is coming because of those two factors, that is incomplete relaxation delay and NOE effect, and therefore, carbon 13 NMR cannot be quantitatively analyzed like a proton spectrum. So, these are the practical aspects of carbon NMR. So, now let us move to how do we interpret or analyze a carbon 13 1D NMR spectrum. So, the next few slides what I am going to show is basically a set of table taken adapted from this book, and this has much more extensive tables which you can refer to. What we are trying to do here is that given a structure of a molecule, we are going to see how we can predict the chemical shift value. So, this is again similar to what we did for hydrogen proton NMR. There also we were given the structure, we had some rules, empirical rules, Schulre rules and Pascal-Simon rules and so on. Based on that given a structure we try to predict the chemical shifts. So, let us look for carbon, how do we do that? So, this is what you have to do, these are the basic 3 steps, very similar to what you do for hydrogen proton. So, basically you start from a base chemical shift value, that means for a given structure, let us say it is aliphatic or is ethylene, given functional group, or if it is aromatic, for a given functional or group of molecule, a functional group in a molecule, you start from a base value which will be given in a table. Then to that base value you start adding the values based on what are the different substituents present in that molecule. So, for example, if it is a halogen substituent or it is a nitro group or it is a amine group, based on the functional groups you start adding the chemical shift to that. So, again this is taken from a table, and then finally you get the total value of the chemical shift, which is based on the base value plus a contribution from different functional groups. So, let us look at a few examples. We are not going to exhaustively look at all the examples, as I said this is more exhaustive tables are given in this book. So, we just an illustration of how this can be done. So, this is the base values which we will consider for a aliphatic system, cyclic and acyclic. So, for a cyclic case you can see that if you have a methane carbon, the carbon for methane, the base value will be assigned as minus 2.3 ppm. So, suppose you have an ethane molecule, then what you do is for a ethane, that for the C1 this carbon or this carbon, the base value is considered as 5.7. Now, look at propane. In this case of propane, this and this are 1 and the middle carbon is C2. So, if you look at C1 carbon, if you are analyzing the chemical shift of C1 carbon, then you consider a value of 15.8 as base value, but if you are considering the middle carbon which is C2, then for that carbon you should start from a base value of 16.3 and then you keep adding based on the substitution wherever is present, that we will see. So, like this you can do it for all the acyclic molecules, and you can see that if we are based on the different acyclic groups, you will have basically the different position, different base values. Okay. So, let us see what happens now. Look at the substituent. So, in the previous this one we saw only the carbon in the acyclic system, but now I start adding substituents. So, let us say I add a substituent at this position x. So, that x position, what is the influence of this on this and this carbon? For that you have to look at this table, that if you want to look at the effect of this x or a contribution of this x on this C alpha, and then you have to look at this column here. So, if you have the substitution is a fluorine, then you have to take 68 as the contribution. This you have to add to the base value. So, base value was shown in the previous slide, and this is now the slide containing the contribution values, which both of them now have to combine. Similarly, if you have an OH group substituent at this position, you have to add 48 ppm to the base value. If it for Z beta, for a OH present here, you have to add 10 ppm to the base value. So, like this you can do it. Similarly, you may have a functional group in the middle of the molecule, not at the terminus. So, in case it is in the center or somewhere in the middle, now look at based on the position, you have to then add these values. So, for example, let us say you have you have a fluorine present in this, here is a branched here, there is a fluorine here. So, what is the effect of that fluorine on C beta? So, for that you have to look at this side, the effect of fluorine is 6 ppm, whereas the effect of fluorine on directly attached carbon is very high, 63 ppm. So, you see this is the inductive effect. The moment the fluorine next carbon, it dies down rapidly, and if you go to further away, the fluorine has even lesser effect. So, these are the values which we have to add to the base value. So, we will look at an example. So, let us say we have this molecule where this chlorine is attached to this second here in the CH position. So, now this we have to use the previous table. So, this is a branch kind of a system because it is in the middle, not in the terminus. So, we have to basically look at this table here, this molecules. So, if you do that, let us predict the values. So, this all taken from the previous table. So, I will take base value as 13.4. I am now calculating for this carbon. For this carbon, I am looking at the base value 13.4, because remember in a butane, in the butane system, we saw in the first slide that the base value should be taken as 13.4. Now, you add the contribution of the chlorine if it is at this position. So, this is now with respect to chlorine, this is alpha, this is beta, this is gamma. So, if you look at the previous table, if for a chlorine it is at a alpha beta position, you have to look at this value of 10 ppm. Okay. So, if you look at that, then you have to add the 10 ppm, you get 23.4. Similarly, if you look at delta 2, which is this carbon, you will have to add 25, that is a base value for this carbon, because again coming from the butane, and then you add this contribution, you get 32. And for delta 3, it is directly attached to this chlorine, and if you take this value, you get 35.2. And similarly, for delta 4, it is minus 4. So, you have to basically look at that. Actually, there is a slight error here. So, what we are looking at is this side here. So, here the numbers are reversed. So, it should be 1, this is for 1, this is for 2, this is for 3, and this is for 4 here. So, there is a typo here, you have to just reverse this order. Now, this is if you look at the observed value for those same carbons, they match very well. You can see that they match very well with the observed values. Again, remember, they are not exact, this is all empirical rules. When we talk about empirical rules, it means it can be approximately correct. So, this basically helps you to predict this. So, given a structure of a molecule, the idea here is that you should be able to predict this chemical shift, and you will be having the experimental value with you. So, it helps you to assign which peak will correspond to which carbon. So, this is basically the goal behind this exercise, is that given a spectrum and given the structure, suppose I want to do a mapping or a matching of which peak in my carbon spectrum corresponds to which peak in my molecule in which peak in my carbon spectrum correspond to which atom in the molecule. For that I can use these empirical rules and try to predict the chemical shift values for different carbons, because I know the structure and I know the rules, and I will be seeing some peaks in my spectrum. So, I can do a matching and then figure out which peak is corresponding to which carbon, and that sorry, there is a typo here. So, which basically means this is called assignment. This whole process of trying to match a spectrum peaks in the spectrum with a observed with a predicted chemical shift, we use the word assignment. So, let us look at some another cyclic system. So, for cyclic system also there are set of rules given in this the book Fibrollin, and similarly the idea here is just it is an illustration. So, you can see, suppose I have a system like this. In this case, this one is directly attached to oxygen. So, therefore, this is the base value which is given in this in that book, and based on this base value I add the contribution because of this OH. So, you see when the OH is directly attached to a carbon, that carbon of course will you expect to get the most deshielded because of the electronegative effect, and therefore, this contribution is very high. So, the chemical shift of this carbon therefore, is expected to come around this ppm. Then again, if you recollect in the last class, we saw the chemical shift ranges, and there also we saw that if you have a C single bond O, the carbon of chemical shift comes somewhere in this range 60 to 80 ppm. Now, if you look at the second carbon here, which is away from here, so the inductive effect is reduced, I mean is now less compared to the influence here, and again according to the table it is 8 ppm. So, if you add this, you get this value. And now, if you look at the third carbon, it is even further away, and that has a contribution of -5 to the base value. So, if you add this, you get C. So, this is basically the 3 peaks which you expect. What about this peak? This is same as this, because there is a symmetry here. Similarly, what about this peak? This is same as this carbon. So, we are only going to consider one set, which is here is the same as this. So, let us see how it compares with the observed values. It turns out the observed values is actually here shown on this side, and you can see it matches very nicely with this carbon, not very well with this and this, but definitely let us say in your molecule, in your spectrum, if you are seeing only 3 peaks and you get this value, and the predicted is what you expect, and in the observed is you see 3 peaks only, obviously then very easy to do the mapping. This is called mapping or assignment, very easy to assign, because this 66.6 has to be corresponding to this, which means that whatever peak you get at this ppm in the experiment, that corresponds to this carbon. Similarly, whatever peak you are seeing in this ppm will be matching with this, and that corresponds to this carbon, and whatever spectrum you see in this correspond to this. So, you see this is a very useful tool for predicting chemical shifts based on the structure and what you match it with your observed value, so that you can assign which peak corresponds to which carbon atom. We can do this also for this kind of a system, again taken from this book. You get more exhaustive tables. I am only limiting it to a few functional groups, because this is only for illustration. And again you can see for this kind of a molecule, if you have this where there are various substitutions, and this is now a C double bond C. Again, if you remember in the last class, we saw that C double bond C comes somewhere between 100 to 150 ppm. So, the base value is taken for this calculation as this value 123, and based on the substitutes at different positions, you have to add the values. For example, if you have an aliphatic substitution, aliphatic meaning only hydrogen or CH2 3 or CH3, Based on that, you have to basically add this value to wherever they are present to the base value. So, we are now trying to calculate the chemical shift of this carbon. Okay. So, this carbon where the arrow mark is shown, we are going to calculate for this carbon based on substituents at these positions. So, let us look at this molecule here. There is a hydrogen here, there is CH3 here, there is CH2, CH3H. So, you can see that now look at this corresponding picture here. So, our A is CH2, B is CH3 and this alpha is CH3. So, if you use all these values here, you can do the prediction. So, for this carbon we are going to look at both the carbons. For this carbon it will be the base value plus the different contributions coming from this table. So, if you do this math, you will get this value for this chemical shift, which is 1. Similarly, if you look at 2, again you have to look at this picture, and with respect to 2 these are different values. So, again you can use this table. So, with respect to 2 you will get 133.2, and you can see this again matches very nicely with the observed value. So, that means in your spectrum when you record, if you get a C double bond C in the C double bond C region comes somewhere around 100 to 150. So, in that region if you see 2 peaks corresponding to these 2 positions, this is observed value, then you want to assign it which carbon is which, you can very nicely easily assign that this ppm peak at this ppm corresponds to C1 in this molecule, and this peak which will be observed is C2 because it is based on this prediction of this. So, this is all based on this table here, and this is a more exhaustive functional group substituents are given in this book. So, let us look at another example with an aromatic system. So, in the case of an aromatic system, the same principle, you start from a base value which is 128. Again remember, aromatic peaks come always between 100 to 150. So, the base value is somewhere in that region, and that is 128.5. Now, based on the substituents at ortho position or at this position or ortho, meta and para, there is this there is a typo here, this is meta and this is ortho. So, this is ortho position, this is meta position. You can see that there are different values, and then you can also calculate again based on these rules. So, if you look at alanine look at amine group, then what is the value of 1 that is coming from here, that is 19.2, that is added to this base value, and you basically get this peak. And there is at para position there is a nitro group, so that will also contribute to this carbon here, and you will get this value which is what you get. Similarly, if you look at this carbon same philosophy, same idea, you can use this table and the different substituent positions, and you can calculate these values. Now, let us see how it matches with the observed values. Again looks very nicely, it matches almost within 2 to 3 ppm range, it is matching with the observed values. So, you can see that if I get a spectrum with 4 peaks in this region, and if I have to assign which peak corresponds to which carbon, I can use the simple rules of prediction and then match it with this molecule. Okay. So, we will look in the next class and how there are different prediction softwares which are available in literature. Basically, the idea is looking at these empirical rules, we are going to predict which carbon has which chemical shift, and there are many softwares available. I will give you the websites, URLs of these softwares, which you can go yourself and try it out, and it is very useful learning experience to generate your own structures as an exercise, and you generate the chemical shift value, and you can look in the literature for the published values, and you can compare them and see how nicely it works. So, we will see that in the next class.